we are here to look at the role of the arts in nuclear weapons abolition. We are people from the arts and activism community, and we think that there's the intersection with many of the UN goals that reflect what I call the 4 pillars, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But we are convened today by the Western States Legal Foundation, represented by Jackie Cabasso here. We have an artist representative here, Helen Zugabe from Washington, D.C. I also hail from Washington, D.C. And we are just two are meeting together, but we're all in community together. The purpose here is to lift the primacy of the arts in the matter of the big issues confronting our world, whether it's domestic issues or the big international geopolitical issues, and also the primacy of civil society activism. So as we look at this matter, we see a number of areas. We have artists as subject matter experts, which is rarely done. If we look generally, we find it mostly as policymakers that are discussing the matters of nuclear weapons and non-proliferation and abolition. But we're going to look at the logic and the language for civil society activism. This is the civil society room. We'll look at visual art to look at these domestic and international issues. But we center ourselves on global human needs. I think there's a great proponent to articulate that in Jackie here. We'll look at the United Nations humanitarian ambitions. And our purpose is to embrace the arguments for nuclear weapons abolition. So amongst our presenters is Ms. Jacqueline Cabasso here. She's going to discuss a range of things. I put this placeholder in, but she has a very important agenda. We are also joined by Ms. Helen Zugabe, and she will speak to her own visual language. And I chose these 2 pieces from her presentation because they have the sympathies with an exhibition in Washington, D.C. that will launch next week, that will lift Jacob Lawrence, and she has in much of the body of her work looks at Jacob Lawrence for inspiration. So she'll talk more about that. And then I am also represented here, and I positioned myself with my own life predicates, is what I call them, and I represent that graphically here in this Venn diagram with these 5 elements. And I hope that I can be seen in my life as I express that with these areas. This last one, which is the matter of faith and the faith community, I'll go back to the Yale Divinity School. They published in the spring of 2009 this journal called Reflections, and the title of it is called The Fire Next Time, and it was all about nuclear weapons and the theological imperatives for nuclear weapons abolition. I commend that work to all of us as another point of departure in that discussion, the lifting of nuclear weapons abolition. So I think it's a very important piece of the discussion for all of us to have. We look at what I consider there are 4 pillars to this intersection as we look at the role of the arts in nuclear weapons abolition. That's what we're going to look at as the fourth pillar. One of those pillars is human rights. It is a human right to be safe on this planet. And its antithesis is war. Its antithesis is the instruments of war, whether we're talking weapons of mass destruction. The ultimate of that right now is nuclear weapons. So we'll look at human rights, but I want to look particularly at human rights because of what the UN has done last year in the post-George Floyd murder matter, and the report and the guidance that they have given the world on excess use of police force. So we'll discuss that a little bit later. The next one, the next pillar has to do with peace education. And we know that there is, out of the Office of Disarmament Affairs, is a new initiative called Peace Education as a New Literacy. And so I think, you know, I would also commend that work to us to examine that, because the language of peace, the language of peace building, the language of conflict avoidance is important. And so on September 20th is Peace Education Day. September 21st is International Peace Day. So they kind of like go together. And I think for the last couple of years, there has been this concerted work to link the two, because this new literacy for peace probably needs to start much earlier in civil society with education, that kind of thing. So we think that's it. The third, well, this is, you know, there are many elements, many academic approaches to peace studies. There is the Peace and Justice Studies Association, in which many universities and academic programs around the world are participants. But I love lifting this particular graphic. It's fantastic. There are no winners in war. Every human is collateral from those who would present war as a matter of human relations. It's just, there's no place for it. So there's a litany of these programs. There's one to which I'm directly associated, which is the Jimmy Carter School for Peace. It was established, it's renamed, rebranded to focus on peace, out of the George Mason University in Virginia. I sit on their Dean's Council, and the matter of peace building is really important as an initiative there. The next pillar are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And out of these 17, there are many of the humanitarian interests, and we can look at intersections of them. I think if we look at doing the matter of partnerships, and I think that the creative community, beyond Richard Florida's technology creative class or finance creative class, there is the arts, culture, and humanities creative class that should be a focus on those partnership building. And so that's number 17. 16 has to do with peace, justice, and strong institutions. So, but there, you know, we can look at all of these things with intersections, but those are the ones that I highlight. And then there is the matter of the NPT, the TPNW. There's a language there about the primary thrust of the Treaty on the Prohibition, its signatories. So with that, we will be regaled by what I consider to be, by whom I consider to be amongst the clarion voices. Jackie has been at this a long time. She's connected throughout the world in this matter. She understands how to articulate. She comes from an artistic background herself. She is really uh, quite the spokesman to look at this intersection of art by an artist turned activist who is still an artist, I think. And so, Jackie, please allow us to hear from you.
So let me just start out by thanking Mel. I'm the executive director of Western States Legal Foundation in Oakland, California, which was established 40 years ago, and I've been there for 39 of those 40 years. I'm also the North American coordinator of Mayors for Peace and a national co-convener of United for Peace and Justice, which is a partner in the Poor People's Campaign. I mentioned those affiliations because they're relevant to what I'm going to be saying today. So I started out thinking I wanted to be an artist and wanting to be an artist. Why? Because I thought that art was inherently political. Why did I think that? Because in high school, in an art class, we were shown a picture of Picasso's Guernica, and its significance was explained to us. So I got this wrong-headed idea. And as I went along, I went to UC Berkeley in 1971, right after the big upheaval there, which is not particularly an art school, but I thought, well, that's where the action is, right? And I found that actually the action was not on campus, it was off campus. I found that the art department was as sexist as you could possibly imagine. And I later found out that art was, in my experience, not about how good the art is, but about who the artist is and what letters they have after their names. So I sort of quickly became disenchanted with that and found myself being a full-time anti-nuclear activist. That's the short story. But I still like to dabble in art. So this is the logo I designed for Western States Legal Foundation. And let me tell you what it means, the symbolism. So in the California tiger salamander in the middle here is a threatened species whose range includes the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in Northern California. Livermore Lab is one of the 2 U.S. labs that is designed and developed every nuclear warhead in the U.S. arsenal, and is still doing so today. Now, during the Middle Ages, salamanders were believed to be impervious to fire. And like many women who were accused of being witches, many salamanders were burned to death. In 1988, the lab announced plans to build a new incinerator to burn deadly byproducts of its nuclear weapons programs. The lab seemed to believe that human beings and other living creatures would be impervious to the health effects of toxic and radioactive particles dispersed into the air by the new incinerator. Western States Legal Foundation played a major role in stopping the incinerator, and we felt that the California tiger salamander is an apt symbol of resistance to continued destruction of the environment by nuclear weapons research and production. Now, regarding the sunflower, in 1996, U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry said, "Sunflowers instead of missiles to the soil will ensure peace for future generations." This is particularly poignant now because this was when he planted sunflowers on a former missile site in the Ukraine. The sunflower is the national flower of the Ukraine. It's also the symbol of the Abolition 2000 global network to eliminate nuclear weapons. And in 1995, Western States Legal Foundation was a co-founder of the Abolition 2000 global network to eliminate nuclear weapons, which reached over 2,000 groups around the world in calling for completion of a treaty to eliminate nuclear weapons within a time-bound framework. Abolition recognizes the inextricable link between so-called peaceful and warlike uses of nuclear technologies and calls for development of clean, safe, renewable forms of energy production that do not provide the materials for weapons of mass destruction and do not poison the environment for thousands of years. And as you can see, it says around the edge here, Western States Legal Foundation for Peace and Earth, abolish nuclear weapons. I'll just leave that screen up. I have a few other slides. So now let me move into rebuilding a broader nuclear weapons abolition movement. From his earliest writings and speeches, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was passionate about nuclear disarmament and ending war. So I want to begin with some of his lesser-known quotes. In 1958, King wrote, The struggle for peace and the struggle for civil rights are tied together in many, many ways. I feel that the people who are working for civil rights are working for peace. I feel that the people working for peace are working for civil rights and justice. In a 1959 address to the War Resisters League, he said, "No sane person can afford to work for social justice within the nation unless he simultaneously resists war and clearly declares himself for nonviolence in international relations." He also asked, what will be the ultimate value of having established social justice in a context where all people, Negro and white, are merely free to face destruction by strontium-90 or atomic war? Today, the choice is no longer between violence and nonviolence. It is either nonviolence or non-existence. In 1964, he declared, "Somehow we must transform the dynamics of the world power struggle from the negative nuclear arms race, which no one can win, to a positive contest to harness man's creative genius for the purpose of making peace and prosperity a reality for all of the nations of the world. In short, we must shift the arms race into a peace race." On June 21st, 1982, at the conclusion of the United Nations Second Special Session on Disarmament, 1 million people rallied in New York City's Central Park, calling for the elimination of nuclear weapons, and huge solidarity demonstrations took place around the world. That day, I was among over 1,300 people arrested nonviolently blocking the gates to the Livermore Nuclear Lab. And I will show you the next slide here. This is a book that I co-authored called "Risking Peace: Why We Sat in the Road." So on June 20th, 1983, that's a year later, after months of planning and preparing, thousands of people converged on the Livermore Lab to peacefully demonstrate their opposition to the escalating nuclear arms race and to nonviolently put a stop to business as usual at the lab, even if only temporarily. The demonstration was one of 6 different International Day of Nuclear Disarmament actions that took place that day around the world. That day, a jubilant mood prevailed at Livermore as thousands of demonstrators filled the streets and intersections around the Livermore laboratory with their banners and balloons aloft. A large contingent of elders and juveniles led a procession that included a marching band, nuns, punks, and doctors. Hundreds of affinity groups participated in the attempt to shut down the lab using a variety of means. One group erected a windmill in the middle of the road, and a small forest of tree people came dressed in branches. Blockaders joined hands and stretched out across the roadways to block incoming cars. Some sang and danced, others meditated or prayed. Support people took possession of backpacks and other personal belongings, watched, cried, and called out words of encouragement as their friends were arrested, handcuffed, and loaded onto waiting buses. I was among some 1,500 people who were arrested that day, leading to my group trial with others. In that trial, nearly 40 years ago, we presented an international law defense, contending not only that nuclear weapons are illegal under numerous international treaties banning genocide, mass poisoning, and targeting civilian populations, but that the Nuremberg Charter, ratified by the U.S., mandates a right of resistance to international law violations. In the 1980s, fear of a nuclear war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union was palpable, and it was at the top of most people's minds in the U.S. and around the world. But coming on the heels of the many civil rights movements, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the women's movement, the gay liberation movement, and the ecology movement, the massive anti-nuclear movement that arose was not single issue. One need only look at the 61-page Livermore Weapons Lab Blockade Demonstration Handbook prepared by the Livermore Action Group for the June 21st, 1982 nonviolent protests and civil disobedience at the lab. The first point in the statement reads, "The ultimate goal of the Livermore Action Group is to further the cause of global nuclear disarmament, the demilitarization of American society, and a redirection of economic priorities that provides for a more equitable distribution of wealth and resources at home and abroad." The handbook includes extensive background on the lab, its role in driving the nuclear arms race and nuclear testing in Nevada, the effects of a nuclear weapons use, and radiation health and safety. It calls out the role of the lab's management, the University of California, in lobbying for new nuclear weapons. It stresses the inextricable link between nuclear weapons and nuclear power and advocates for conversion of the lab to research on safe energy alternatives. The handbook devotes a page to the 1961 UN General Assembly resolution on the prohibition of nuclear warfare, quoting from the resolution that the use of nuclear weaponry, quote, would exceed even the scope of war and cause indiscriminate suffering and destruction to mankind and civilization, and as such is contrary to the rules of international law and to the rules of humanity. Noting that this resolution was adopted by more than 2/3 of the General Assembly's membership, and that, quote, the United States voted against it in the General Assembly, and has opposed efforts to withdraw legitimacy from nuclear weapons, the article concludes the first use and first strike nuclear weapons that are being developed at Livermore and Los Alamos are in direct violation of international law. An article entitled U.S. Militarism, the War at Home and Abroad is prefaced with, many people opposed to nuclear weapons see the problem as a symptom of a pervasive militarism in American policy with far-reaching implications for all world citizens. It begins, the U.S. is at war. It has been in a state of war or preparedness for war for over 4 decades. Soon the Reagan administration's yearly spending will surpass the peak budget of the Vietnam War. Sound like deja vu? The handbook includes a history of nonviolent direct action, a discussion of the dynamics and politics of nonviolence, and nonviolent direct action guidelines. There is a discussion of feminism and overcoming masculine oppression, and information about forming affinity groups and making decisions by consensus. The 1983 version of the handbook added a discrimination introduction. Quote, in the disarmament movement, it is important not only to struggle against bombs and missiles, but also to struggle against other forms of violence that confront us. The two forms of violence, racism and homophobia, are strongly interconnected with the creation of weapons of destruction. After all, it is the same system that is responsible, a system based on domination, on the belief that some people have more value than others, and therefore have the right to control others. Because we believe it is the system and all its forms of violence that we're fighting, we must make a commitment to fight the violence that occurs around us and between us. Despite the massive international anti-nuclear movement, following the end of the Cold War, nuclear weapons fell off the public's radar screen. It was almost as if the planet itself breathed a huge sigh of relief. People around the world hoped and believed that they had escaped a nuclear holocaust and largely put nuclear weapons out of their minds. Most people believed that the threat of nuclear war had ended, but it hadn't. In 1961, Dr. King presciently wrote, I'm convinced that if our civilization is to survive, we must rise from the narrow horizon of clashing nationalism to the wide horizon of world cooperation. World brotherhood is no longer a beautiful ideal, but an absolute necessity for civilization survival. With Russia's illegal war of aggression on Ukraine, accompanied by its thinly veiled nuclear threats, public fear of nuclear war is on the rise again. But it is increasingly clear that the multiple national and global crises we're confronting, including nuclear weapons, climate change, systemic racism, a growing wealth gap, and rising national authoritarianism, arise from the same foundational causes, and that we are unlikely to prevail on any of them as single issues. We need to come together as never before to build political power through durable, diverse, multi-issue coalitions, networks, and networks of networks, based on our shared commitments to universal and indivisible human security. There is an emerging movement that I believe has the vision and potential to bring together such a coalition and to build powerful political pressure from the bottom up. It's the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Exactly 1 year before his tragic assassination in 1968, Dr. King declared, I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has picked up Dr. King's unfinished work weaving the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, environmental devastation, militarism, and the war economy, and a distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism into one moral fusion campaign. The Poor People's Campaign moral budget calls for cutting U.S. military spending by half, including by closing 60% of U.S. foreign military bases, ending the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and elsewhere, and dismantling and eliminating nuclear weapons. With active state-based organizations in more than 40 states, the burgeoning Poor People's Campaign is being supported by an extraordinary range of constituencies, including labor unions, faith organizations, racial justice, anti-poverty, environmental, and peace groups, and is building political power through its We Must Do More campaign, mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educating for a movement that votes. Theomusicology, art, and culture are central to the work of building the Poor People's Campaign and are considered essential for moving people's hearts and minds. And this, I'm going to show you. Can you see my screen? Okay. So this is a virtual banner that the Poor People's Campaign groups in different states produced during the COVID shutdown. And people were asked to make a letter, design a letter in whatever media style they wanted to, and take a selfie. And then they were put together. So it says, everybody's got a right to live, which was one of the slogans. And you can see me here. And if you can see me, and I made my O into a peace symbol. And there's so let us work together. Well, I just want to say that United for Peace and Justice is the proud national mobilizing partner with the Poor People's Campaign. And I urge everyone who's listening, who's an American, to find out more about the campaign and consider joining your state's Poor People's Campaign organization. Let us work together to understand the common causes of multifaceted crises as we work with the Poor People's Campaign and others to build a massive, multi-generational, multiracial, international, moral fusion movement we will need to overcome systemic violence and build a peaceful, just, sustainable, and inclusive world. As Gandhi observed, the moral to be legitimately drawn from the supreme tragedy of the bomb is that it will not be destroyed by counter-bombs, even as violence cannot be by counter-violence. Mankind has to get out of violence only through non-violence. Hatred can be overcome only by love. Counter-hatred only increases the surface, as well as the depth of hatred. And he explained how social transformation will come from the bottom. We have to make truth and nonviolence not matters for mere individual practice, but for practice by groups and communities and nations. Before general disarmament commences, some nation will have to dare to disarm herself and take large risks. The level of nonviolence in that nation, if that event happily comes to pass, will naturally have risen so high as to command universal respect. Her judgment will be unerring, her decisions firm, her capacity for heroic self-sacrifice will be great, and she will want to live as much for other nations as for herself. So I just want to reread the first point of the 1982 Liberal Handbook. The ultimate goal of the Liberal Action Group is to further the cause of the global nuclear disarmament, the demilitarization of American society, and a redirection of economic priorities that provide for a more equitable distribution of wealth and resources at home and abroad. So just maybe we're starting to come full circle.
Thank Jackie for her presentation and wrapping up this history. We're going to come back about this matter of the handbook, which is really a call to action by citizens groups with a kind of a roadmap for that. This handbook, and it's what it progressed to in 1983, but also this matter of citizen engagement, the call to action, and the matter of looking at these different groups then and what they mean for us today. The next element here, a presentation by a Nigerian American artist who speaks to a domestic issue
My name is Victor Epok. The artist was in commission to create this piece at the vestibule of the Phillips Collection. The title of the work is State of the Union. Things fall apart, can the center still hold? The story just started unraveling of my experiences of the past, maybe 4 years or beyond that, of the gradual political and social tension in the United States. And I started gravitating to that, and I thought, why didn't I just tell that story? Or just let it out in this piece about some of the angst that I've been feeling and that most Americans have been feeling, the call for unity, and as a result of violence, whether it be police violence, whether it will be violence of citizens against citizens. I just feel that the State of the Union is in very shaky spots. With insurrection of January 6th, back in my old country, Nigeria, that was equal to a coup. It was an unsuccessful coup, but that is what it's amounted to. Most Americans are not used to that. But when a sitting president encourages something like that to happen, to overthrow a government or a democracy, that's the coup. And the response to it afterwards, trying to play it like it didn't matter, just gives me a pulse of whether this United States, this beacon of democracy, can still hold onto democracy. You're looking at the story unfolding on the wall, and sometimes you discover familiar things. It's familiar symbols that tells the story as you remember it. I invite the audience to participate in the story and discover it for themselves.
Okay. Very good. So let me go back to the PowerPoint here. So next we will have a presentation by Helen Zugabe, who by way of her own background is Lebanese by birth and has experienced this issue of migration herself. So please allow us help.
Mel, thank you. What an honor. And to meet you, thank you so much to be sitting on this panel with you. These are small little shoes that I painted. It's part of a larger installation called The Places They'll Go. And I'm taking off on Dr. Seuss, Oh, the Places You'll Go. As Mel said, I was born in Lebanon. My father was born in Damascus under the French Mandate. And we were forced to leave Lebanon in the Civil War. And you saved the day. So I think the Lebanese have a way of creeping into everything. There's something that happens. Anyways, we were forced to leave. There was a curfew. We hadn't been in school. We were ultimately sleeping in the back corner of our flat on the floor, couldn't go to the windows. And then were one of the last planes. We were evacuated to Athens, Greece. And when we were running after my father, it was in the day, there was a curfew, there was sniping and bombing, etc. We hadn't been outside in quite a long time. And so we were a bit startled, to smell the air and the sun. And we were running after we were is your speaker off now? Better? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So as we were running, my sister, one said that the other one had lost her shoe on the curb. And I remember looking back and seeing her shoe there and wondering whether or not we should run and get it, or should we run after my father because he was going to get mad we weren't fast enough. And I don't know to this day. I've thought about it so much, but for me, shoes are symbolic in my art as two symbols: running away from danger, but also running to your dreams as well. I also wanted, I hope you guys haven't heard this poem, or maybe you've heard part of it, Warsanshire. Much of my work is about the Syrian war. I finally got to go back there. Go to the next slide. I finally got to go back. In 2010. And this is a piece I did called Circle Home or Bait. This is a detail. I was invited for a big show, and you know, here I am. When we left Lebanon, you know, streaming to the airport, and Daddy was right beside the window. We were saying goodbye to him. And I said, when are we going to be coming back, Daddy? Come back home. And he said that we would be back in a week. And so I believed him. And my week was 35 years. So I didn't go back home for. And so this is the first piece I did for that time, which brought back a lot of not so good memories, some good memories. So bait is the word home in Arabic that I've written over and over and over again. And friends call it bait, but I call it circle home. It's where is our home? And now I'm in Washington longer than I've been in Lebanon. But the little poem, I wanted to read just a say in my paintings. It's by a woman named Warsanshire. So she is from Kenya, born to Somalian parents. She lives in London now, and she writes this: no one leaves home unless home chases you, fire under feet, hot blood in your belly. It's not something you ever thought of doing until the blade burnt threats into your neck. And even then, you carry the anthem under your breath, only tearing up your passport in an airport toilet, sobbing as each mouthful of paper made it clear that you wouldn't be going back. You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one burns their palms under trains, beneath carriages. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck, feeding on newspaper, unless the miles traveled means something more than the journey. That to me is just an amazing way of summing up some of my journey, some of the journeys that I know. I just came back from Istanbul, working with Syrian refugee students, age 14 to 18, now forced to live in Turkey. And some of their stories underneath smuggled, give all their money to smugglers and traffickers. Smuggled one, he was smuggled underneath the body of a truck, and his brother had to go over the wall. Anyways, it's hard to listen to those stories, but I'll get to them at the end too, and I'll move through these so I won't torture you. This is called Map of Home. This is the sea behind me, Lebanon, over my head and my heart, my kitty cat Stumpy, the mountains, my brush, the hand of Fatima that my aunt gave me. This is going back in 2010, and this is just before the Arab Spring. That's why I'm bringing this up. That hadn't happened yet. And this is Zahli in the mountains of Lebanon, where the family home is. And when Daddy was born under the French mandate, look, I asked him if he's Syrian or Lebanese, and it was all the same thing. There were no borders, the artificial borders now. So this is Daddy, my cousin entering into the family home, which is, we own it, they own it, the family owns it, but it's abandoned because it was occupied during a war, because it had very good vantage point to be able to shoot out of the windows, and everything was stolen out of there. But we have the key and open the key and go into. This is part of the gate in Damascus. So I went to Lebanon, made my show. We drove to Syria, to Damascus to see where Daddy was born, the old city, and then on to Jordan, where we have relatives everywhere. This is Halab or Aleppo. You refer to Ukraine. You know, in Mariupol, it's what they call they call Mariupol the second Aleppo or Halab because of the destructions and the siege. Of course, Halab had a siege for over 2 years, but this is an example of one of the beautiful homes that was destroyed, the courtyards, just beautiful. When I came back to America, the quote unquote Arab Spring began. And this is the first piece I did, remarking on that when we were feeling optimistic and for women's equality or more equality. Women and men marched in the streets. And so I used the symbol of the flower as an indication of hope. And I've been working now, unbelievably, because we're in the 11th year of the war in Syria. I'm not taking away from any, Afghan, it's really difficult. Jackie have referred to Guernica. Of course, Guernica was here in the United Nations too. The little story that I'd like to say about this is that in 1937, when Picasso painted that, depicting the horrors of the Spanish Civil War, it was still in his studio, but it had gained notoriety. And so a member of the German occupation forces came to his studio. And I know we've talked about this now, but he looked at Picasso and he looked at Guernica in his studio and he said to Picasso, "Oh, you did this." And Picasso looked at him and said, "No." This is in the Temple of Bel in Palmyra. This is its destruction during the war. This is a large piece. This is in gouache, opaque watercolor, a large piece called Generations Lost. This is an installation I did called Eat the News, where I was feeling these huge numbers, thousands, and even 15 dead Syrians. And I tried to make note of them and keep track of them, and it was too much even for me. And so I decided to focus on some small details. I don't know if you remember this image of the little boy. I'm commenting on how we take in the news, what we do with it once we get it. So this is this is another one. This man carrying his baby. Of course, like you said, I'm Jackie about being a circle. I have a new installation called Eat the News Again. And how many more do we have to have? Mel is inviting me here to show some of my series called Syrian Migration Series. I hope you know of the great African-American painter, Jacob Lawrence. If you don't, Google him straight away. I won't be insulted if you do it right now. He painted in 1940 and 1941, the Great Migration, after World War I, the movement of African-Americans from the rural South to the urban North to get away from Jim Crow, segregation, lynching, et cetera, et cetera. When Mel first saw the the first iteration of these paintings, and I was going through them with him and comparing them with my Syrian migration, where they are leaving because of war and because of bombs. I don't know if you remember this conversation, but you quietly said to me, they were leaving because of a war too, a different kind of war. So this is the beginning of the series, and in Syria, there, Tunisia, it had spread to Egypt and so on. It got to Syria because these little kids, there were 12-year-old kids playing football, soccer, in their schoolyard and painting graffiti, anti-government graffiti on the wall of their school. They were in outside of Damascus, went crazy. And so they began protesting, and that's how the revolutions and ultimately now the war began. Also a drought. People are forced to move. 1 million farmers are suffering drought. So they came into Damascus to try and find work. And so that exacerbated the protests, the revolutions, and now the full-fledged war. And they keep, Jacob Lawrence narrated his, which I also did as well. So in fact, there's like a timeline. He has 60 paintings, 30 at the Phillips collection that Mel showed in the beginning, and 30 at MoMA here. I guess you could go see them here, and documenting them. And so I echoed and was inspired and saw the parallels between the movement of peoples forced to flee their home. And like that poem said, nobody wants to leave home, nobody. And, I can assure you, no one wants to be a refugee. This is showing the siege of Halab, Aleppo, where Damascus is Halab is the second largest city in Syria outside of Damascus. They're very famous for their cats, and I love animals and cats, and you can see the little kitty there. I put him in. They were forced to eat cats. This is the word hurriya, which means freedom in Arabic. And after you find Jacob Lawrence, you will see my comparisons. On the right is one of my migration pieces, this depicting the use of chemical weapons. Since we're here, I wanted to talk about this particular piece. And in fact, next week is a 9th mark of the chemical attacks in Ghouta in Syria and Damascus, which killed 1,400 people, and mostly women and children. Outlawed, of course, but guess what? It was sarin gas. My comparable painting here, and you also see allusion referencing Guernica. And so that painting there is called From Guernica to Ghouta, because it doesn't seem like we learn. Jacob Lawrence's 60th panel said, and the migrants kept coming, in 1941. So for me, that's just like, we're supposed to learn.
Helen's work is significant.
Thank you.
It's part of America's patrimony.
Yeah, you can go to the library. They began following my work after 9/11. I did a piece called Prayer Rug for America, and that's when I got on the Catherine Blood's radar. And then she followed my career and subsequently acquiring more pieces, including 2 of my migration series. Mm-hmm. And each one of these also accompanied by a small narrative. Jacob Lawrence's great piece of the 3 little girls at the blackboard, A, B, C, and here I have the Arabic letters, but I'm also, because they're stuck in the camps. These children, if you think about it, were 11 years. They've been born in the refugee camps. They don't even know what Syria is anymore. Only like, I'm talking to them. And I'm learning from them in Turkey and Istanbul, talking with them. They face so much racism. They don't even want to speak Arabic. They pretend they only can speak Turkish, and they can only speak Arabic at home. This is child labor, which is a huge, huge problem. Trafficking, child marriage, all these issues are little points that I talk about with regards to the Syrian migration. And I am only using the Syrian migration because it's where I am from. But if you change the country and you put Afghanistan, you put Ukraine, you put Iraq, you put Somalia, you put, I mean, on and on and on. It's the same issues. They try and leaving by throwing, also to save their children, throwing them on moving trains as well. Of course, the Mediterranean is a constant source of this duality of last resort, hope, possibility, but also tragedy. And if anyone remembers this famous photograph, sadly, you know, maybe 5 minutes, it captured our attention till we turned the page. But this is when this little Syrian boy, Aylan Kurdi, who's 3 years old, he was washed up on a Turkish shore. And it's a Turkish soldier who's finding him. And a lot of artists did iterations of this, Ai Weiwei. Everyone did it. And I decided to include it because of how we forget, you know, we forget about this. A curator came to see this, a couple of these pieces. I didn't know him, then he went back to Germany. And when he saw this painting, I looked at him and I could see that he was crying. And I said, "Why are you crying, Sebastian?" And he told me, "Because I forgot about this and I'm glad you painted it." And it made me think so much. And then he went back to Germany, and about a couple months later, he wrote me and he said, "I thought of you because the Germans, they renamed one of their German rescue boats that goes out and tries to save the people on the sea after the little boy, Aylan Kurdi." And I'm almost finished. This is Idlib on the northern province of Turkey and Syria, where you have mostly women and children living in, they've been pushed and pushed and pushed all the way to the northern province. One tiny little thing that I wanted to point out is because this problem is so massive, you can see in my work these tiny details like the little girl's bow or little shoes or these tiny things. It's my way of letting you focus on some tiny little aspects so you can connect, like with the shoes. I don't have kids, but you can visualize your children in those shoes. This is so ironic because in that pushing and the bombing of Idlib and so on, and them trying to find safety, they've taken refuge in olive groves. But how ironic, because olive is symbol of peace, and I felt I had to paint that. And this is my last image here. This is the installation of these shoes that I painted called the Places You'll Go. And you know, I'll quickly finish now. Coming back now, I recently came back from Turkey, and listening to those young people and those students and listening to their stories and learning from them. Honestly, every time I talk, I say, what's the difference between us and them? I always say one word, it's luck, right? Luck is only difference why we're here. And I add now, after my experience in Turkey, listening to those young people, I add hope because they want to be a brain surgeon. They're optimistic. They are resilient. So that is, and this is hard, but we do have that hope, hard as it seems. I did not go into there thinking I would come out with that. but in thinking about our talk today. And one little boy said, I can be sad, but why should I be sad? His home was devastated, bombed so badly. They lost everything. Okay, but anyways, I did want to end with that. Mel, and thank you so much. I will stop sharing. So thank you. Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Helen. In reality, the artists amongst us could help lead the way. Our world is troubled. And to hear the stories of our artists really provides that hope. It actually calls us to act. It requires that we act. Speaking of hope, and Helen, I'm going to ask your help with this. I want to show another video clip that is the embodiment of hope. It is the trailer of the pictures from the Hiroshima schoolyard. Let me get that link.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
I'm not hearing it either. So this is a full-length film. It's very well highly awarded film. So the story is that in 1945, with the bombing itself in Hiroshima, we know that 3 days later was the bombing in Nagasaki, but the Hiroshima story is centered here in this particular film. The then minister at All Souls Church Unitarian in Washington, D.C. Was
for overseas relief.
Not David. This was Dapal Davies. This is 1945. David E. Kim mentioned. So there, the matter of his being distraught about this. He was aware. He was one of the originators of the film. Yes, Ellen.
To a schoolyard in a decimated city.
No one in the room can hear.
Beautiful images emerge.
Okay. So,
drawn with a child's hand.
I'll stop narrating while the other people hear, and then go back to it after it stops.
From a child's heart, turning horror into hope.
It just so happens.
アメリカンステっていうのをみんなこうして匂ったんですよ。それでアメリカってこういう匂いがするんだってみんなで言ったのを覚えてますね。
に対してのお返し、ありがとうっていう意味があれに入ってたんじゃないかなと思います。
この欄干が全部なかったと思うんです。
It's really amazing that those kids were able to draw pictures like that at that time.
Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me?
60 years later, the pictures emerge again.
Such sweet heart to me.
That's what the children of Japan did. They gave the pictures to us as a sign of peace after we had sent them the school supplies when they didn't have any.
Come, bridge builders. Come, border crossers. Come, peacemakers. Come.
And the message of hope is passed on.
I move that the Board of Trustees supports the Hiroshima Drawings Project Committee's July 2010 trip to Japan.
オールソウルズ協会からですね、このような英文の手紙が参っております。
その時代の自分の小学校1年2年の時のそのフレッシュな気持ちを
The pictures are going back to Japan, and they will be reunited with the artists who drew them.
My picture.
Up until that moment, they'd just been pictures, and now they were people.
It's a remarkable story because it centers the art and these children, survivors, many of them, we call them hibakusha. They would make pilgrimages to Washington every August. And a part of that stop, sometimes on the way to New York, was to come by the church to see the drawings where they were housed. And so I had the great fortune of being on the stewardship team, the curatorial team for those Hiroshima children's drawings at All Souls Church. And working now on an opening for selections from that body of work to be exhibited at the Phillips Collection. It opens during the NPT. It's time to open during the NPT here. So it will be on exhibit from August 23rd through November the 27th. So I invite you to, if you come to Washington, please let me know. I will be one of the docents for this exhibition. Would love to be involved in touring the exhibition. I'm both familiar with the work of Jacob Lawrence and the work of these drawings, and so I can speak to those matters. There's a matter of, as I spoke to this matter of policing, and I'm not going to show this particular video, but I just want to pivot back to the matter of human rights, the UN matter of human rights work. And this matter of policing has issues globally. In the United States, of course, we know of the Rodney King matter that was videoed. We know the George Floyd matter that was videoed. But we can talk about the origin of policing in the United States, going back to Reconstruction. The Ku Klux Klan may have been amongst the earliest of the self-proclaimed policing units in the United States, and so that legacy carries on through our American history. In the Department of Justice, there are a matter of these consent decrees to actually look at policing and changing to the extent that it can on the culture of policing. And this last year, in 2021, the United Nations actually did a number of its own resolutions against excessive force of policing on peoples of African descent. Again, coming during the decade of, the decade on peoples of African descent. So I look at these, this matter of policing is another pivot point that should be examined, as it was in the 4 Weeks campaign, to look at this now. Out of the Department of Justice, a gentleman named Roy Austin, that you see his name there, was really interested in this matter of policing, and actually got hired by Facebook, of all places, to look at the matter of harm. Now, he comes out of DOJ's, amongst many areas, and then a focus on policing, but the issue of harm done to people in policing work. And one of those groups that comes out of there, led by a firm called Shepard Mullen, which is contracted by DOJ and Georgetown Law School, to look at active bystandership for law enforcement. ABLE is called. And so as we look at bystandership, there's these officers in the Rodney King case and the Breonna Taylor case and the George Floyd, these officers have a duty to intervene when there is harm being done to citizens, and they did not. And so how do we look at that? As Daniela Frazier took the video of the George Floyd murder, she was a bystander. She did not intervene, but she gave us that video. Now, the results of her bystandership is that she took a lot of oppression against her, tyranny against her, because she took that video. It's a contravention of policing, if you will. But we have it. So amongst the things that I'm interested in doing is that matter of bystandership in many aspects of American life. How do we participate in that bystandership as we intervene against harms that are being done? So I think you'll hear more about that. I really left the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights to look at that particular issue and how that might be expressed not only in the United States, but also around the world, as we talk about those issues that both you, Jackie, and Helen mentioned there. So I want to lift some of the artworks that we see artists do, some of these graphics. This one here is called Duck and Cover. Interesting, we might remember, some of us who are old enough, during these, the Cold War, we were taught to get under our desks. This is an artist, Carlos Walker, who does a reversal. So he's looked at issues, the body of work, one of the bodies of work is called Walk a Mile in My Shoes. The auction blocks for slaves, he reverses it so that Blacks are the slave masters and doing the auctioning. This matter of the George Floyd matter, that's a part of that body of work, looks at a Black policeman on a white person. So he's opening the conversation to how do we discuss these matters of being in community together since we share the same geographies. I think it's very powerful work. This is an artist, Daniel Minter. He is in Maine, in the Northeast of the United States. He is delivering an address, commencement address at the University of Southern Maine, I think it is. But he tells the story of the Malaga Straits, where people across ethnicity were forcibly removed from an island now in Maine because the governor of Maine wanted to have a vacation place for peoples. And so there's lots of these expressions. This is in 2022. This one, nuclear weapons over Manhattan. Really interesting. Pedro Reyes got commissioned to do this work to look at what would, just to pick, what would happen if an explosion came over Manhattan. So that was in Times Square. Everybody knows Keith Haring. This is one of his works. And again, the nuclear weapons theme is seen throughout history, which is really very nice. And then this is another poster. Hulk magazine did a whole body of anti-war protest graphics, which is really nice. Another one, we can look at Helen Frederick. I think Helen was mentioned earlier. She is a globally known printmaker, and this is her work looking at the Doomsday Clock. So this is her depiction of that. Joan Danziger, her sculpture around natural forms. This is horses. In this instance, she's done scarabs and beetles, but all of, we can look at nature as being under threat globally, but these are some of the issues, as we looked at earlier, the Sustainable Development Goals, because climate is a very important matter. Another work by June Linowitz, another Washington, D.C. artist, another environment, it depicts a lot of environmental work and the threat to our planet in her own body work. This work here is by a guy named Melvin Hardy of the Yamaki bonsai tree, which was given to the United States. This tree was a surviving tree from the bombing of Hiroshima. It is now about 405 years old, give or take 10 years, because depending on who you ask, the National Arboretum wear this bonsai tree, but I did this work at Helen Frederick's studio at her behest, so I'm really proud of that work, and it has toured, so I'm really happy about that. This is Lucian Perkins. He was a Washington Post photographer and filmmaker, but this is looking at the war in Chechnya. So this matter of photography is there. Richard Dana did the next work, digital work. This is, I had to turn it on its side. Excuse me, Richard. But this work looks at another, the way I looked at it is looking at the role of cities, and that's goal number, I think, 11 in the Sustainable Development Goals. Here we have those important works. Reference was made to Guernica a number of times by both of our artist subject matter experts here. Again, the Spanish Civil War. This is the 3rd of May. This is, I think, who is this? This is Goya. And Rubens, The Consequences of War here. And then this is a more recent work of World War I, people, soldiers, having to bury their comrades. So with that, I do need to get to this work by, and I'll need some help with this, Ellen, to share my screen on this one. The artist is Brian Daly.
Opportunidad. Vervuiling. Aleatorio. الأمان.
I think all art is autobiographical. It really is about your time and your environment. So I believe my art has to really explore the kind of social issues and political issues of our time. The Words Project came to me as one I wanted to really look at globalization. I asked the question, how has globalization affected language and culture? I went to 120 countries in order to accomplish a goal of asking 13 words. I asked these people to give me a response with one word, the first reaction that comes to mind when they hear something like government or love or war or peace. These words made them really think about these things that are fundamental to everybody, whether or not it's government or whether or not it's love or whether or not it's peace, it's war. It made them really wonder about happiness, for example, and what is happiness? What is love? What really came out of it is it became a very serious dialogue about justice, inequality, government, corruption, democracy. I wanted to use the opportunity to listen to what they had to tell me about what was going on in Nicaragua, what was going on in Colombia, what was going on in Ukraine. You got to see the common problems that we all suffer. These are universal issues. So it's that type of thing that I try to explore, human nature, questions about social problems going on around the world. I kind of operate from the principle that our experiences either expand or limit our world vision. And the more experiences I have, I think the greater my feeling is that my world vision increases. I've always considered that my time in government and arms control and intelligence issues was my best performance piece. I mean, I really had a very interesting time being the fly on the wall and seeing all of the backroom negotiations, the complexities of the issues, the dangers that are out there. In 2014, there was a major incident that happened, and that was, of course, the Russian invasion of Crimea. What was troubling to me is in 2014, the same year, Putin announced that he was changing their nuclear doctrine to one in which he would use nuclear weapons to de-escalate a crisis. Nuclear theory over the years has always said the first use of nuclear weapons will mean that it goes out of control and escalates. And he changed his strategy to where he thought that the idea of using nuclear weapons was really a good idea early on because it'll stop you. You will become so concerned about it that you will not go further. Well, that then led to my Lamentation series. That series is about the history and destruction of weapons in war and leading up to nuclear weapons being the most obvious, most dangerous and detrimental to humankind that you could ever imagine. I've been trying to get people's attention on that issue ever since the end of the Cold War. Everybody thought it was all over with and nuclear weapons were passé and it was no big problem. And now they're coming to the fore more and more. Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has moved the clock to 2 minutes to midnight now, all because of current events. So I think it's important that we use those examples and those opportunities to have a dialogue, which is what art's about.
I just want to linger with Brian for just a minute because I do believe I've been able to look at the arc of his life. Started in art, Los Angeles, bumped around the gallery scene, you know, played around a lot in architecture, gallery management, and that kind of stuff, and determined that in his own quest for freedom, he wanted to know more about the world. Went and got his PhD, I think at Southern Cal, whatever, and then went immediately from that to government service. That started his performance piece, as he describes it. And so he was an actor in understanding nuclear policy issues, space issues, you know, military materiel issues. He wrote a book on Russian deception. He is, you know, quite the intellect. Spent his career both in government and corporate, and then came back to art to do this work. And so for some of us, and I'm one of those, who looks at this understanding of the role of art in looking at these geopolitical issues. We have, you know, Jackie here, who has explained her own navigation from art through understanding these geopolitical. So there are many artists around the world. We are in the company of two, probably more here, and I'm sure in our audience there are many, many more. But to lift this matter of the role of the arts in our topic, while we're here at the United Nations, the Non-Proliferation Treaty talks, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the legal issues that were brought up, and how do we acculturate people in peace building through peace education? That was our purpose today. So with that, I'm going to throw a set of questions out to our discussants today. And Jackie, you know, one of the things that you mentioned was about Mayors for Peace. Please describe how that came to be, how you came to it, where it is today, and where might it go? What are your hopes for that?
Mayors for Peace is working for a world without nuclear weapons, for safe and resilient cities, and for a culture of peace as essential measures for realizing lasting world peace. So you heard the culture of peace part in there, which is probably most directly relevant to what we're talking about today. As of August 1st, Mayors for Peace membership has reached 8,200 cities in 166 countries and regions, representing well over 1 billion people, at least on paper. And this is something that might be of interest. You might expect Japan leads with 1,737 member cities, but you might be surprised to know that Iran is in second place with 1,016 members, followed by Germany, 836, Italy, 519, Spain, 401, Belgium, 395, the US, 220, the Netherlands at 170, France at 166, and Nicaragua at 155. Every city in Nicaragua is a member of Mayors for Peace. So I think that should shatter some stereotypes right off the bat. And Mayors for Peace has set its next membership goal of 10,000 members, and is working with a wide range of civil society partners and government agencies and so on to reach that target. So I encourage everybody to help us reach this goal. Now, Mayors for Peace, I think, has tremendous potential, but it's hard to, it depends where you are in the world in terms of what you can do with it. There's a new European chapter. In Germany, they're very active. For example, they have an annual day where they all fly Mayors for Peace flags, and a team of bicyclists goes from city to city. That's done on the July 6th, the anniversary of the International Court of Justice 1996 opinion on the illegality of nuclear weapons. In the United States, we've had the most success getting very far-reaching resolutions adopted through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which is the national nonpartisan association of America's big cities. But it's hard to actually get them engaged at a deeper level, and that's our challenge. I would like to, if I could take just 2 or 3 minutes, just tell you a little bit about how Mayors for Peace engages with the arts. Okay, so Mayors for Peace regularly uses art in its public education and advocacy efforts. For example, by encouraging member cities to mount poster exhibits, including artwork by atomic bomb survivors like Basha, depicting their experiences of hell on earth. And for those people who are here, if you haven't already done so, I invite you to visit the Mayors for Peace poster exhibit, which is just around the corner. And I also was very struck by the contrast between the paintings by survivors in the years following the bombing, which are paintings of hell on earth, and contrasting that with the children's artwork was really interesting, that those children could be so hopeful, create such positive images. So Mayors for Peace also hosts an annual international children's art competition called Peaceful Towns. And I just want to show you a few examples. Can you see my screen? Okay, so here are 3 examples. This is the 20, I know what I can do, wait a minute. I shouldn't have messed with success, huh? There we go. Yay. Okay, so this is the 2019 winner. This is Anastasia Skobelskaya in Krasnodar, Russia, 9 years old. And here's her message. The flying angel over the city encourages and raises the soul. 2019. This is 2020. This is Nagar Gabi in Bandar Abbas, Iran, 8 years old. His message. I'm not sure his or her message. Each society has different wishes, religion, feelings, beliefs, and ethics. Therefore, we should respect all differences in a world without borders. And 2021. This is from Hiroshima, from Honoka Yamada, who was 14 years old. And she says, my hometown of Hiroshima wishes for a peaceful world without nuclear weapons. We fold paper cranes with a prayer for peace. Regardless of different nationalities, skin color, culture, and religion, our wishes for peace are borderless and connected by a rainbow bridge. This painting depicts people from various backgrounds holding hands and sharing paper cranes. Children from around the world cross over a rainbow on the back of paper cranes. With a wish for a world in which children can walk into a bright future in their peaceful towns, I designed the picture with a motif of glittering stained glass. And these are the winners each year are printed on these plastic folders, which are then used to disseminate matters of peace information throughout the year, which I think is really nice. I could go on a little longer, if that's okay. All right, so let me share them with you. On September 21st, the International Day of Peace, in 2018, the Mayors of Peace 50 Cities, 50 Traces Against Traceless Oblivion Art and Peace exhibit opened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the first U.S. city to show this exhibit, which was sponsored by Hanover, the Mayors of Peace lead city in Germany, and which features photography of a Stuttgart-based artist, Claudia Dietrich. Now, the artistic concept behind 50 Cities, 50 Traces is to juxtapose individual traces from 50 Mayors of Peace cities, highlighting the diversity and beauty of these cities and the daily life taking place there. And it's conceived as an invitation to respect and preserve the world's visible remains, which are bearers of memory. So, and it's appeal against the deployment of nuclear weapons and the destruction of our cities in support of Mayors of Peace. Now, the technique here is that she rides her bicycle around, taking thousands of photographs of things like stains in the pavement or remnants of paintings on buildings and whatever, and then she cuts them up and finds a trace. So I'll show you what those look like. This was the opening. So this took place, the opening, in an art gallery in the heart of Pittsburgh's thriving cultural district. And the opening's reception was part of a gallery crawl that kicked off Pittsburgh's International Festival of Firsts. So here you can see the traces, and each one represents a different city. And it was really interesting, but seeing the artwork in person, with the vivid colors and the images looked almost three-dimensional. They were more compelling the more I looked at them. And what's most important, like I said, there were 250 people there. As I observed groups of visitors going around the gallery, they were really engaged and they understood the point. And I read many comments in the visitors' book saying that they never look at their surroundings the same way and appreciating the fact that nuclear weapons must never be used again. So, I mean, I think it was completely successful. Claudia, the artist, and Raymond, the curator, came to Pittsburgh early so that Claudia could produce a Pittsburgh trace that was part of the exhibit, which I showed you. but a second Pittsburgh trace was permanently installed in a location in Pittsburgh after the exhibit closed. Now, this exhibit opened in Hiroshima in November of 2018, and it was supposed to travel to interested mayors of peace cities around the world through 2020, and in the hopes that the tour would culminate with this exhibit here at the UN. But unfortunately, like so many other things, the plans were derailed by the pandemic. So I'm not sure what the status of it is, but I hope that they're able to take it on the road again, because it really was very, very impressive and different, as you can see. The Avon exhibits that the Mayors of Peace offers are very graphic images from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These do not look like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and yet they stimulated the conversation, which is what Mel was talking about. So, thanks.
Can you explain again the concept of a trace?
Yes, the concept of a trace. Okay, so Claudia, the artist, takes photographs. She rides her bike a lot. She takes photographs of the ground, pavement, stains. Could be stain, it could be little paint that's left partly worn off of, traffic markings. It could be, No, these are just things that are there. But when there are cities around the world, not cities that were necessarily bombed, but these photographs, they're enlarged and they're cut into small squares, and then she chooses from among those. So they're completely abstract, but each one is different. And that's the concept. And then there's some technique that she's figured out where they're developed or screened or something onto these metal plates that have a certain slightly glittery surface.
So for those in the audience, anxious to hear what your thinking is, how you react to this whole notion that beyond the policymakers, beyond the government actors, what do you think might be the possibilities of developing a sense of creative people taking their role in governance, perhaps governance in this matter of moving our world toward a nuclear-free planet? What's the thinking? What can we imagine about that? And if those of you online have any ideas, we'd benefit from hearing from you as well.
This whole presentation just has really hit home for me too, because I feel like it's what often reminds us of our humanity and really is what inspires people to take action, and also kind of reminds us of what we're fighting for in the first place. And I think that's so important for these movements, because often, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons, a lot of what we talk about seems a lot more sterile, and it doesn't really highlight our humanity in these conversations and talk about the impacts of these weapons and what it actually means to use them. And I feel like art is such an important medium to do just that. And I think it'll be really important to in building rebuilding the nuclear weapons abolition movement. So that's kind of all I wanted to say. And yeah.
Well, it was quite disturbing and moving to see Helen's artwork about the Syrian children and other such things. So thank you for that. And that's what we need to have in mind when we're working for the non-use and the elimination of nuclear weapons. But such things are already happening. They're happening in Syria, they're happening in Ukraine, they're happening elsewhere. And we also have to keep that in our minds, which is hard to do. There's only so many things a person can focus on. Jackie, just on the traces, those are supposed to be traces. Well, here's my understanding of traces. They're traces that would be left after a nuclear bomb devastates a city. That's my understanding of what the concept of traces is. So that's all I'll say. Thanks.
Hi, I'm a great fan of Helen Zugave, as she knows, and I like Mel Hardy too. So nice to see you. I've had this on in the background while I've been trying to do things, so it's just been really interesting to hear what you have to say. So, and hope. I like the idea of hope. That's what we will all aspire for. Thank you.